Hi, my name is Leila Haile, and welcome to the Equity and Inclusion Workshop. Thank you for your interest in expanding your knowledge of social justice as it applies to race, gender, and sexuality. In this workshop, we will explore vocabulary, history, the current state of civil rights, and how these issues complement the culture of the city of Portland to create a welcoming and affirming environment for all. So firstly, be uncomfortable. This work isn't easy, at least not if you're doing it right, and discomfort is where growth comes from. Ask clarifying questions. In order to make sure that we fully understand each other, we have to ask clarifying questions to know that we're all on the same page. One diva, one mic, making sure that one person speaks at a time so that we can all hear each other fully. Listen to understand, not to respond. Oftentimes when we find new information or we learn new things about each other, we are eager to push back or respond, and I want to make sure that everyone has the space to be heard. Vegas rules: what's shared stays and what's learned leaves. We want to undoubtedly hear some personal stories from each other, and we want to respect that vulnerability. Reserve the right to change your mind. Equity is about constantly educating oneself and challenging old ways of thought that may hinder progress. Move up, move back. If you tend to take up a lot of space, leave room so that others speak up. Conversely, if you don't take up a lot of space in the room, I encourage you to push your comfort level and to take up more space. Wait, why am I talking? Oftentimes when we hear new information, we are inspired to tell a story about that one time something happened to our cousin back in Vermont, but again, we don't have much time today, so we want to make sure that we have a point when people are contributing. And finally, Elmo, enough, let's move on. Oftentimes when we have new information that challenges old ways of thought, we can find ourselves spiraling into very intense conversations. But again, we have a limited time together, so we would like to make sure that we make the most of it. Hey, so why are we here? We are not here for diversity, because we already know that we are a diverse group of people. We are not here for sensitivity, because we are already assuming that everyone here is a sensitive human being who is empathetic to his or her comrades. And we're not here for tolerance either, because we believe that tolerance is something that you have for a crying baby on a plane or for a headache, but not something that you hold for other human beings. Equity is about making sure that every single person has what they need in order to participate fully in society to their full potential. What is racism? Oftentimes when we talk about racism, we don't actually all work with the same definition, so it's important that we all get on the same page. In the first column, we have that feeling of dislike for a racial or ethnic group, plus a firm belief in this dislike leads to prejudice. In the second column, we have prejudice plus actions that harm those you have prejudice against equals discrimination. And that sort of discrimination can take place in the form of economic discrimination, housing discrimination, etc. And when you have this type of discrimination plus the institutionalization of this discrimination, which is then perpetuated in society, that equals racism. Now, institutionalization is a very long and drawn-out academic word, which basically means putting something into a system. This system can be government, it can be a school, it can be housing resources, etc. So here we have a chart that lists overt examples of white supremacy which are socially unacceptable, as well as covert examples of white supremacy which tend to be more socially acceptable. Take a second to observe this chart and note anything that you find familiar, anything that is new, or anything you would like a further definition on. So here we have a chart, a basic chart describing the elements of intersectionality. Now, if you've never heard of intersectionality before, it's a term coined by Black feminist scholar Kimberly Crenshaw to describe the overlapping elements of identity. Here, this chart lists race, sexuality, ability, and gender, but we know that we can add many more layers on top of this, such as class, documentation status, languages spoken at home, education, etc. This fun little comic guides us through intersectionality as it applies in a social justice setting. Here we have Bob, and Bob is a stripy blue triangle and should be proud of such. Sadly, some people do not like Bob. Some people don't like Bob for being a stripy triangle, and some don't like him for having stripes. Luckily, there are liberation groups, but they aren't intersectional. So they look like they either cater to folks with stripes or folks who are triangles, and they don't talk to each other. In fact, they compete for resources. And Bob can't work out where to go to feel fully seen. Bob wishes that the triangles and stripes could work together. So this basically illustrates the fact that all oppressions are linked, that intersectionality is the belief that oppressions are interlinked and cannot be solved alone. Often in community we have a phrase that's saying that if you scratch a racist, you will find a sexist. If you scratch a sexist, you'll find a homophobe. So we use this as an illustration to link why our communities need to work together in order to fight for true liberation. So up next we have a video of a young child who is shopping for toys and runs into a little snafu.
Would it be fair for all the girls to buy princesses and all the boys to buy superheroes?
Well, why?
Because girls want superheroes and the boys want superheroes, and the girls want pink stuff and the boys don't want pink stuff. Yeah.
Boys want both, but why do you think they do that?
Because the companies who make these try to trick the girls into buying the pink stuff instead of stuff that boys want to buy, right?
Right, but you can buy either, right? And boys can buy either. If boys want to buy pink, they can buy pink, right?
Yeah, so then why do all the girls have to buy princesses? Some girls like superheroes, some girls like princesses.
Yeah,
some boy like superheroes, some boy like princesses.
absolutely.
So
You're absolutely right.
Why does all the girls have to buy pink stuff and all the boys have to buy different color stuff?
It's a good question, Haile.
So what our young shopper was illustrating here is an element of what we like to call the gender binary system, which is a culturally defined code of accepted identities and behaviors that assumes males are men who are masculine and females are women who are feminine, and nothing exists outside of this system. So here you'll notice between these two columns we have a little bonfire in between these two elements of the gender binary system that are male and female. And that represents the punishment or cultural burn that we receive when we step outside of the binary. So for example, if a man decides that he would like to wear pink, which then crosses them over into the females or feminine zone, he will cross over this fire and receive some sort of cultural burn. We know that someone who is masculine, who exhibits feminine traits, can often be subject to degradation, certain types of name calling, social ostracization, and all of those things are cultural burns. And we know that where there's fire, there is smoke. And so everyone around them who sees that cultural burn happen is then affected by that, and thus the binary is reinforced. So digging a little deeper into common terminology related to gender, we've already gone through the gender binary. Below that, we have trans or transgender, which is an umbrella term applied to those whose gender identity is not the same as the sex they were assigned at birth. Someone who is cisgender is someone who identifies exclusively as their sex assigned at birth. And we know that most folks are assumed to be cisgender. Genderqueer is a term applied to individuals who do not fit within the gender binary, meaning they do not identify as either male or female and rather exist somewhere in between. Transition is the process of changing one's gender expression, how they express themselves on the outside, to match their gender identity, what they know on the inside to be true. Assuming that most folks know what lesbian, gay, or bisexual is, GNC is short for gender nonconforming. Similar to genderqueer is someone who does not identify within the gender binary. Queer, which used to be a pejorative term for someone who is in the LGBTQ community, is now an umbrella term that is both a political, sexual, and gender identity. Non-binary is same as gender nonconforming or genderqueer. Two-spirit is a term used exclusively by folks in the Native or First Nations communities. That is both a gender and a sexuality identifier. If you are not within the Native or Two-Spirit communities, you probably should not be using this term. Intersex is used to describe someone whose chemical or physical makeup does not fit neatly into the biological definitions of male and female. This person may have any number, combination of external or internal sexual characteristics that deviate from what is often normalized. Asexual is someone without sexuality. Demisexual, demi meaning halfway or partial, means someone who has a more reserved sexuality. And for more information or further vocabulary learning, please visit transstudent.org. Digging a little deeper into the definition of intersex, the following is a chart that is actual scale that is used by doctors on newly born children. And this chart is used to determine whether or not a child is prime for normalizing surgery, often without the parent's consent or full information. Moving forward into gender pronouns. Pronoun is simply what you would use to describe someone if they were not in a room. So for example, if someone left their backpack, you would say, oh, that person left their backpack in the room, or he or she left their backpack. That is the pronoun that you would use to describe that person. So here we have listed he, she, they, and z. There are literally hundreds of different pronouns that folks may choose to use. This is not an exhaustive list. Again, please go to transstudent.org for more information on the variety of pronouns available to folks. So again, another lovely informational chart from our friends at transstudent.org. This is the gender unicorn. And this is a tool used by all sorts of folks of varying ages and places in their lives to identify gender identity, expression, sex assigned at birth, physical and emotional attraction. Oftentimes we're taught that all of these things are the same thing, but we know that they're not. Gender identity is what you know in your heart and mind to be true to your gender. Gender expression is how you express that on the outside of your body, so the kind of haircut you have, the type of clothing you wear, the sort of glasses you wear, etc. Sex assigned at birth is pretty straightforward. It is the biological determination that a doctor makes when you are born. Note that sex and gender are two different things. Physical attraction is who you find yourself obviously physically attracted to, and emotional attraction is who you find yourself emotionally attracted to. And this scale lists folks on a scale of 0 to very. Again, there's not a chart, so it leaves a lot of room for nuance and expression. Moving forward to see how all of these elements fit together into marginalized identities and how that affects us. We have here the pyramid of hate, or how bad jokes lead to genocide. And this is a tool used by anthropologists and sociologists to both describe the social elements that lead to genocide and hopefully stop those elements from coming to fruition. So at the bottom of the pyramid, we have simple implicit bias like stereotyping, insensitive remarks, belittling jokes, non-inclusive language, justifying biases by seeking out like-minded people, and accepting only negative information and screening out positive information. And these are the sort of things that would fit into the prejudice column of the chart that we looked at earlier. So once these sort of kinds of biases are normalized, they then lead to individual acts of prejudice. And this looks like bullying, ridicule, name-calling, social avoidance, slurs, epithets, and dehumanization. The sort of bullying or playground style discrimination that we see. And once those things are normalized amongst, once those things are normalized amongst adults and folks carrying social power within communities, that then leads to institutionalized discrimination. And that looks like economic discrimination, employment discrimination, educational discrimination, political housing, and segregation. On the basis of those things being normalized, then we have bias-motivated violence. On an individual level, that looks like murder, rape, assaults, and threats. And on a community level, that looks like arson, terrorism, vandalism, and desecration. And once these things have all been socially normalized, then we have the basis for genocide, which is the act or intent to deliberately and systematically annihilate an entire group of peoples. Now, in order to stop these sort of things from happening, it is important for folks to look on an individual level and identify where their biases or stereotypes or other internalized discrimination may come from. So here we have some individual reflection questions for folks to ask themselves in order to pinpoint where you first started receiving bad or harmful messages about people in your community. Firstly, we have, what was the first example of a Black person in the media you remember? Was it a real person or a character? Was it peaceful, violent, or funny? When did you first learn that not all people are straight? How did it make you feel? And what was the context? Was it real life? Was it TV? Who or where was the last example of a transgender person that you observed? Were they a real or fictional person? And was it positive or negative, and why? And here is a follow-up slide with some both recent and historic examples of all of these problematic elements in media, in case some of you folks are having a hard time figuring out a route. Here are some tips for interrupting oppressive moments amongst friends, coworkers, or family. Firstly, always ask clarifying questions. It can be very easy to put the onus of responsibility on someone else when you ask them to back up what they're saying. Speak from personal experience. Don't lecture, make sure to converse. Use statistics or facts. Use this one sparingly because no one likes to be talked down to. Use humor when applicable. Oftentimes, funny situations are the easiest way to get us to jump from one way of thinking to another. Make inclusive and positive or validating comments when you're interrupting. Make sure that you acknowledge the person's intent, but also you don't forget the impact of their statement. Use I statements, and don't accuse or attack. Give an invitation to dialogue, and be non-judgmental. Next steps. What can allyship look like in action for cisgendered folks? Make the first move. Self-disclosing your pronouns is a great way to signal that you're open and affirming. Ask directly about pronouns if you feel comfortable, or just use someone's name. Ask someone how they self-describe. Give space for them to talk, and repeat the language that they use for themselves. Remember that not all experiences are the same. Everyone is a beautiful snowflake. It's okay to misspeak and make a mistake. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. Say sorry once and move on. Skills for homework. Think well of others. Demonstrate patience. Know your objective when interrupting. Share new information or knowledge, and demonstrate your leadership skills. Most importantly, don't lecture, converse with folks. And always be interruptible. This includes interrupting yourself before anyone needs to, as well as being open to interruptions from others. So now that you've taken your first steps towards racial, gender, and sexuality equity, here are some first steps that you can check in with yourself after you walk away from this training. Have I intentionally and aggressively sought to educate myself further on issues of racism by talking with others, viewing films and videos, finding reading material, attending lectures, or joining a study group or other activities? Have I spent some time reflecting on my own childhood and upbringing and analyzing where, how, and when I was receiving racist messages? Have I spent some time recently looking at my own attitudes and behaviors as an adult to determine how I am contributing to or combating racism? Have I eliminated my use of language, light and dark imagery, and any other terms or phrases that might be degrading to or hurtful to others? Have I openly disagreed with a racist comment, joke, reference, or action among those around me? Have I made a clear promise to myself that I will interrupt racist comments, actions, etc. that occur around me, even when this involves some personal risk? Have I grown in my awareness of racism in TV programs, advertising, and news coverage? Have I objected to those in charge about that racism in TV programs, advertising, and news coverage? Resources for further reading. SankofaNorthwest.org, transstudent.org, Black Lives Matter PDX, SURGE, or Standing Up for Racial Justice.org, Western State Center, Q Center PDX, and the Safety Pin Box Project. Thanks again for taking part in our Equity and Inclusion Workshop. For additional resources, please refer to the Office of Equity and Inclusion Team's website or SankofaNorthwest.org.